Hi, I'm Greg Ryan, CEO of Chequed.com. Welcome back to ChequedTV this week. Today we're going to be talking about recruiting from talent from your references. And talking about candidate sourcing from references is actually a really kind of interesting topic, and sometimes it can be a little bit controversial. Let me tell you, when I first started in the HR business, I actually started as a recruiter for one of the largest executive search firms in the world. My first 3 months on the job, I had absolutely no experience. My first 3 months, my manager came to me and said, look, here's a stack of references about this high written on a piece of paper, right? Start checking them. Well, the reason that they wanted me to do that was probably about 1/10 because they wanted me to check these references for candidates, and really about 90% because they wanted me to start to build my own pipeline, my own contacts to really start to recruit from. That's where that importance of recruiting from references really started to come in, and candidate sourcing from references really started to come in. There's a couple reasons, big reasons why this process makes sense. First, you know about this reference. You know a lot more information than you probably think you do about this reference. One, you know what they do. Secondly, you know where they work. You know the kind of people that they're dealing with on a regular basis. You know engineers or developers or sales reps. You know the peers or supervisors of a candidate you already presumably like if they've made it to this stage in the process. That says something about that individual that makes them potential for your pipeline. The other big reason is that, quite honestly, the numbers are just in your favor. Look, the reality is that at any given time in the U.S. labor force, about 1/3 of that labor force is in flux. They may not actively be looking for a job, but they're certainly considering a job change. So those numbers are in your favor. I used to joke about this with our recruiters all the time back in a previous business. And I tell the story in presentations that I do all the time about, when you're picking up the phone and you're calling a reference, at the end of that reference, I'll talk more about this in a second, but at the end of that reference and you're making that transition question of, look, do you know anybody else who may be interested? Really, one of three things happen. They either say no, and that's the end of the phone call, and fine, you thank them for the reference and you move on. They may give you a name or so, or name or two, and this actually happens periodically. But the third thing that may happen is something that sounds a lot like this. And that's the door closing. It's the person standing up and saying, hang on a second. There's an awful lot of the workforce out there today because of the conditions that we've gone through in the economy that we're just too afraid to make a change, but they're unhappy. Your organization may be the right place, so the numbers are really in your favor. And lastly, just the reality is that it is a numbers game, and you have this magnifying effect that occurs through reference checking. Now, one candidate equals, typically anywhere from 3 to 5 people that can potentially enter your pipeline. Those are the references. So you've got this really large magnifying effect and almost a viral effect taking place within your pipeline that you should really begin to leverage. So let's talk about how to do that. Well, there's a few basic things that we can start with. First, ask the question. Very often companies have, they've thought about this process, but when they're checking the reference, they're really kind of treating it as a very, check the box kind of activity. They just got done and boom, they're on to the next one. Really what we want you to do is at the end of that reference check, if you're doing this as a phone-based reference check, at the end of that reference check, just ask a simple question. Look, we're really excited about bringing Vince on board. We know you know Vince pretty well. You've obviously given him the reference. Do you know anybody else like him that may be a fit to our organization? And then just stop and let him talk. It's that transition question that can really begin to very easily, without a lot of pressure, begin to transition that into a conversation about potentially sourcing that person. So ask the question is step number one. Number two, again, another really basic one, but it's really astonishing how often this does not occur. Number two is really collect and capture the information on the references. Very often we see companies that have very sophisticated HRIS systems or applicant tracking systems that are using paper and pencil for references. They're going in, and really the only thing that's making it into the applicant tracking system is simply whether the references were checked. Get that basic demographic information in there on the reference, where they work, what they do, who they reference for. Get that in there and make that searchable data. If you're using an online reference checking like Chequed.com, this can be really done easily for you because that's all the information that we're collecting up front on the references. So you don't so much have to worry about that. You just want to make sure that that information is being collected, and then most importantly, make sure it's being done in a searchable format. And again, an online reference checking tool will make that process a whole lot easier for you. Third, train. Train your managers. Again, this is a task that can really be done most effectively very often by hiring managers. HR departments can go through the process, but very often, if it's particularly if it's a scientific or it's a highly technical role, that hiring manager can really be the best person to begin that transition and then start to have that dialogue with that reference check. So if your hiring managers are not doing this, really give them some very basic, simple training on how to do this, or just show them this ChequedTV episode, as a starting point. But again, just having them make that transition, ask that transition question, can be an easy way to do it. Again, if you're using an online reference checking tool, this will be done automatically for you, and it's a very simple process. Lastly, connect. Again, not rocket science here, but really what we're talking about with connect is once that reference is in the system, in your system, and you've checked that reference, make sure, whether you're a recruiter or an HR professional or you're a hiring manager, that you just simply jump into LinkedIn, go ahead and try to connect with that person. Again, we talked about the magnifying effect, right? Now you not only have access to that individual to maintain that person as part of your talent pipeline, but you also now have access to their contacts. So again, really simple steps that you can take, but can have a really profound effect overall on your ability to source candidates in a very passive but very, very effective way. All of the things we talked about, an online reference checking tool can make this a lot simpler. For instance, within Checked, we've got a function that allows you to connect automatically right to all of those references. It's not critical, it's not absolutely critical that you have an online reference checking system. You certainly can do this manually, but it can be done easier when you're doing it in an automatic way. Okay, so that's it on candidate sourcing from references. Hope you enjoyed this. We'll see you the next time on ChequedTV. Thanks.